Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the season finale of the Word of the Day podcast, where useful words are pleasantly explained. My name is Jamie Silva. I am your host, and when I say that this is the season finale, that mainly means that it's the 50th episode. And I kind of arbitrarily decided a while back that we would take a couple weeks break every 25 episodes, to rest, rejuvenate, and recuperate from the grueling schedule of posting a show every single week. Honestly, I think all of us here on the Word of the Day team need a bit of a vacation so we can focus more on our equally grueling regular jobs. Producer Pete, for example, is a highly regarded Elvis impersonator and elbow model, which means there are nearly non-stop demands on his time, and we are so grateful to him and the rest of our staff for their tireless work on this program. In fact, hey, all you guys, the whole staff here, go ahead, get up, give yourselves a hand, please. That's right, you guys deserve it. This is the least I can do, literally. All right, let's get down to business. The first item on the agenda is introducing, or I should say, reintroducing a talented voice actor, Craig, whose voice you may recognize when you hear it from episode 17, in which we covered the words misanthropic and hornswoggle. Craig, thank you so much for being here, and also, thanks for this wonderful opportunity to record in your very own extra fancy and extra spacious San Mateo studios.
Thanks, Jamie. Yeah, it's a pretty sick setup here.
Well, folks, here in this very special episode 50, we are going to feature two words that combine to form a fantastic maxim. Words to live by, really. And that maxim is eschew obfuscation.
What does that mean?
Well, let's not get ahead of ourselves. Instead, let's break it down, starting with the first word, eschew.
Bless you.
What's that?
You sneezed.
I don't think so. As I was saying, the word eschew is
bless
the
you.
word...
Care for a Kleenex there, Jamie?
Okay, yeah, I think I see the problem here. So the word that we're talking about right now does sound rather like a person sneezing, or at least like the written form of someone sneezing, which is like ah-chew, A-H, then like a hyphen C-H-O-O. So if you say eschew, people needlessly offering you tissues is just a risk you'll have to take. But Craig, just trust me on this, I am not sneezing right now, and I promise I will not sneeze for the duration of this episode.
If you say so, Jamie.
That I do. So, in my mind, eschew, which is a verb, means to strenuously reject, avoid, or condemn something. And this is somewhat similar to the idea of not countenancing something, which we covered in episode 10. Except, actually, I would say eschew is even more intense than this idea of not countenancing. See, if you eschew something, you don't just disapprove of it, you actively avoid it. So, for example, if I eschewed the popular nut, cashews, that doesn't just mean that I won't eat them, though that would sort of be the minimum requirement of eschewing. I probably also won't go near cashews. I won't be seen in the company of anyone consuming them. I think they're bad for America, that sort of thing.
What about this, though? What if my favorite candy was these little cashew bars that were only produced by this one family-run firm in the city of Nashua, New Hampshire? And then, in a terrible accident, a big ship full of these cashew chews crashed into an iceberg out at sea and sank.
This is hypothetical, right?
Yes, it is. And so anyway, I get so upset by this, right, that I totally avoid all news coverage of the disaster. So, Jamie, how would you describe my response, my reaction to this awful event?
I don't know, Craig. How would you describe your reaction?
I would be eschewing Nashua Cashew Chew crash news.
Whoa.
Yep. Had to walk a long way for that one, but I think it was worth it.
I don't, a word of the day, staff, folks in the studio, what'd you think of that?
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. You're too kind. Thank you all.
All right. Let's move on to the online definition, shall we? It goes as follows. Quote, to deliberately avoid using or to abstain from, unquote. Well, I'm sorry to say that I think this is a way weaker meaning of eschew than mine, since, in my opinion, eschewing has to be understood as this really strong response to something really objectionable. And that's a sense that this definition sadly lacks. Like, I might abstain from or avoid using ranch dressing if I was on a diet, but I don't think that really means I'm eschewing it. Eschew would better fit a situation where, like, I thought ranch dressing was an all-out assault on the waistline as well as the palate, and I vowed to leave any party or soiree in which the vegetable platter contained a ranch-based dip. That would be eschewing.
There are a couple other definitions that come closer to this sense of eschew, like this one from Merriam-Webster. Quote, to avoid habitually, especially on moral or practical grounds, unquote. Or this one from the Collaborative International Dictionary of English. Quote, to shun or to avoid as something wrong or from a feeling of distaste. In both of these, you can see that the thing being eschewed is just wrong or off-putting or maybe even offensive in some way.
That's right. And perhaps this is why the etymology of eschew is peppered with these old French and ancient Germanic words with meanings like dread and shun and shrink away from. Now, this is the part of the show where I would ordinarily read you some examples of how to use eschew in ordinary conversation or writing. But I'm not going to do that this time. And the reason is simple. Eschew should not be used in ordinary conversation. It's too pretentious, too intentionally obscure, and you would rightly be accused of word-mongering, which we learned about a couple episodes ago, if you tossed it about, when you could simply say shun or avoid like the plague. Now, you definitely can still use eschew if you're being like facetiously or ironically pretentious, but still.
Jamie, are you saying the listeners should avoid the word eschew?
Basically, yeah.
So they should eschew.
Oh, yeah, I guess that's more or less what I'm saying. Like, one of the things that eschew is most known for, actually, is being a great example of a word that no one but a self-important and intentionally verbose person would ever utter. Here's a taste of how people think of it. And this comes, actually, from the great linguist and longtime language columnist, Bob Evans. When answering a reader's question about the origin of an obscure medical term, he writes this, quote, my guess is that what you've encountered is a writer who was stuck with producing a few hundred words having something to do with medicine and started casting about for synonyms to relieve the monotony. It's the same desperation for variety that drives some writers to use words like eschew, prevaricate, and pugilist, unquote.
And then, separately, here's Bob Evans explaining the phrase trip the light fantastic, which just means to dance energetically in a classical sense. Quote, trip the light fantastic is what I would call a twit alarm, in that it warns that you're in the presence of the sort of insufferably pretentious poser who also peppers his speech with words like eschew and indubitably.
Exactly. So yeah, even if I was a big fan of eschew, which I'm not really, I wouldn't encourage you to use it because it has this awful reputation.
All right, but why feature eschew on the show at all if you don't think people should use it?
Great question, Craig. I do so because it's the first half of this terrific aphorism, eschew obfuscation, the second half of which we will now discuss. Obfuscation comes from the verb obfuscate, which means to make something confusing on purpose, or as the Google has it, quote, to render obscure, unclear, or unintelligible, unquote. And obfuscation is just the noun form of the verb obfuscate, so it means the action of making something obscure, unclear, or unintelligible.
What about this word then? Should people eschew it too?
That's right. It is needlessly, even gratuitously obscure, and no one should say it.
So another waste of everybody's time.
Not at all. Here, you see, is the beauty of the phrase eschew obfuscation, which basically translates to the command, be clear. So this maxim encourages us all to speak and write as simply and understandably as possible, shunning vagueness and avoiding confusing or little-known terms. The irony, of course, is that we are exhorted to be clear via two words that are so esoteric, so unnecessarily arcane that few people know what they mean, and really there is very little need to know.
Oh, well, that's pretty poetic, actually.
That's right. Eschew obfuscation is the perfect thing to say when someone, like, writes you a message that's confusing or contains lots of 5-syllable words that really make it clear they've been hitting the thesaurus pretty hard. Eschew obfuscation is also advice that this podcast stands behind 100%. We may feature a lot of words on here that are a little off the beaten path, but never with the goal of simply glorifying obscure words for obscurity's sake. If the words aren't fun, and more importantly, if they aren't useful, then they will never see the dim light of the studio. And now, in one final activity for this very special season finale, I want to feature a few basic, pithy, classic sayings. Stuff like, a watched pot never boils, Then, by substituting obscure words for simple ones, we will transform these sayings into glorious stews of gratuitous linguistic complexity. And your goal here, as you listen, is to try and identify what simple snippet of homespun wisdom these needlessly fancy words are covering up. Okay, Craig, what's the first one?
The first super basic saying goes like this, quote, "The temperature of the aqueous content of an unremittingly ogled cooking container does not reach 212 degrees Fahrenheit." And you all can pause the podcast here or rewind it if you want to listen to that again or think about it for a few seconds.
Okay, I'm sure they're done thinking it over now. So, Craig, that's the one we just heard, right? That's "a watched pot never boils"?
You got it, Jamie.
Well, I mean, I looked it up ahead of time, but thanks anyway. Okay, here's the next one. Quote, "It is fruitless to attempt to indoctrinate a superannuated canine with innovative maneuvers." Craig, any thoughts?
Yeah, so canines, those are dogs, right? And indoctrinate sort of means teach or maybe brainwash. And innovative things are new, like innovations. So you can't teach an old dog new tricks?
Precisely. Well done. And what you just did is actually a great technique for figuring these things out. If you isolate individual words or phrases, however complicated, and you think about what simple concept they relate to, you'll probably be able to puzzle out the full meaning before too long. Okay, let's do just one more here. Quote, "When precipitation descends vertically, it issues forth copiously and continuously." All right, Craig, what do we got?
When it rains, it pours.
So it does. And once again, the Word of the Day podcast does not condone, encourage, or countenance such obfuscation. In fact, we eschew it. But as a little brain teaser or parlor game, I think this is pretty fun.
I'll say. Are there more?
Yes, indeed. There is a whole collection, which you can technically find online by Googling any of the sayings we just mentioned. Not all of them are as well crafted, but over the coming weeks between seasons 2 and 3, I'll be tweeting out more of them from the official Word of the Day Twitter account, which you can find at WOTD_podcast. So perhaps reply to us there with your best guesses for what these sayings are. Okay, in these closing moments of Season 2, I would like to especially thank you, the listeners out there, for doing what listeners do best, listening to this show. If you'd like to support the show and the fine work everyone is doing here, just go to wotdpodcast.com/support, or you might simply rate it on iTunes, which is very nice and very easy. But there are some things money can't buy, and one of those things is your own enthusiasm and appreciation for the show that inspire you to recommend it to your friends and family.
Wait, how much are you offering?
So I guess technically that is one of the things money can buy, but we still aren't paying for it.
Shucks.
That's okay, Craig. It's really the thought that counts. And thank you, by the way, Craig, for coming on the show. It is always a pleasure.
Absolutely.
Well, folks, for all of us here at the Word of the Day podcast, this is your host, Jamie Silva, saying so long from these San Mateo studios. Thank you so much for listening, and we will see you next season.